I'm the director of the South Carolina Water Resources Center here at the Strom Thurmond Institute and the research coordinator here. I'd like to welcome everyone here and appreciate your attendance because I know you'd much rather be out there sweeping pollen off your decks and patios, just like me, getting ready for Easter. Want to recognize Jane Hunter and her family. This is the William H. Hunter Memorial Lecture, part of the Calhoun Lecture Series. And Jane is sitting down here, and we appreciate you and your family and everything you've done. And I would like to introduce Dr. Bob Becker, who will introduce our speaker this evening.
Before I go into that, there's a program coming up that I thought some of you might be interested in, and I just wanted you to be aware of it if you didn't see a flyer. On the 28th of April, we're calling it a conversation with Private Alvin Henderson. And we came across, we were introduced to Alvin through his daughter, who works at the Institute with our not-for-profit studies group. And it turns out Alvin was in the Toccoa Boys and trained at Toccoa with the 501st Parachute Division in World War II. He jumped at Normandy, he jumped at Market Garden, then was captured and was a POW, and his conversations were just fascinating. So with the Ollie group around, and some of you are involved with Ollie, we thought, what a wonderful time to be able to get a group together to talk to this person who has done so much history, and if you're a fan of Stephen Ambrose, actually talk to somebody who was through those events. So I invite you to it. It'll be Thursday the 28th at 7 o'clock in the auditorium, and I think it'll be a delightful evening. This is an interesting year. This October marks the 30th anniversary of the Strom Thurmond Institute. When you sit back over that time and you see the scope of activities that this place has been involved with, it's very gratifying to have been a part and to be a part of such a noble group, and all of you have contributed mightily with the Calhoun Lecture Program and the endowment in the name of Bill Hunter. And some of my fondest memories at the Institute are of Bill Hunter coming in with a list of programs he wanted to have presented and saying, let's get calling some people. I know a handful of people and we'll get this done. And so we just said, yeah, go. And he did. And so it is an interesting memory that we will keep it forever with the Institute. This year also marks my 20th year as director, and this is the last of my years of directing the Institute. After 20 years, you sit back and you reflect and you start realizing, I'm correcting mistakes that I thought were really good ideas a few years ago. And you realize it's time for people to look into the future that are going to have a stake in that future and the future operations of the Institute. So as we close out this 11th season of the Calhoun Lecture Series, I'm pleased to be introducing it for the last time as director. I'll still be coming, and yes, I'll still send in my check. So, but the Hunter Lecture is always a special lecture because Bill was so much a member of the family. When you think of Clemson, and I'm told that Clemson is a place known for its characters. Bill is certainly in the pantheon of those characters in Clemson. So, Jane, we're always delighted to see you and the family here, and we hope to see you here for many, many, many more William Hunter lectures. Tonight's lecture is being given by an eminent South Carolinian. Dr. Stevenson was born in Nessus, South Carolina. For those of you that don't travel the back roads of South Carolina, that's in Orangeburg County. And when I was looking over the materials about Roger, it struck me that he's a product of South Carolina public schools. And that's what he says. So we have to ask ourselves, was he that special, or was it that much better way back then? And it's not that way back. But he went through the public school system. It was a little bit, though, Roger. It was a little bit before that. He's a graduate of Furman University, Wake Forest University School of Medicine, and the Johns Hopkins Hospital. After military service in the Air Force, he had an academic appointment at the University of Texas School of Medicine in Houston, but he returned to South Carolina to establish the Greenwood Genetics Center, where he has served as director until this year. He too shares a reflective time on his leadership of a very stellar program. In addition, he is a clinical professor of family medicine and pediatrics at the Medical University of South Carolina. He's written 3 books, almost 200 publications. He's received the Order of the Palmetto. He's been a Furman Distinguished Alumnus, a Proctor Award for Excellence in Clinical Pediatrics from Bowman Gray School of Medicine. He has honorary degrees from Furman, which he also earned one at Furman, but he has an honorary degree from Furman, Clemson, and Lander. It is indeed an honor to have such a distinguished individual presenting the Hunter Lecture. Please welcome Roger Stevenson.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good evening. Bob has given me permission to come down with the rest of you and wander around as we talk. And if for any reason I don't project well, I will go back up there. So just raise your hand if you want me back on the podium. Otherwise, I'll wander around down here. It's always a great pleasure to be on the Clemson campus. And I am greatly honored to be able to make this presentation in memory of Bill Hunter. When Bob first talked to me about giving this lecture, he asked me to tell you a little bit about the Greenwood Genetics Center in case you don't know of that small institution, and then spend more time on the topic at hand, that is the evolution of medical genetics in South Carolina. So first, let me bring you greetings from the faculty and staff of the Greenwood Genetics Center. We are a small institution, but we, like this group, we are family and a close-knit group. A few words about the background of the center. The center was founded in 1974, and I guess perhaps more than any other question, I hear, why Greenwood? And in short, in 1974, the state, through its Department of Disabilities, figured that they needed a system of service to provide genetic services for persons with disabilities in South Carolina. And the state, as it sometimes does, did not put up adequate funds for that institution. And they came to Jim Self and the Self Family Foundation, and Mr. Self said, "That looks interesting to me. We will match the state dollar for dollar." And as he left, he mentioned that the center needed to be in Greenwood as opposed to. So just a little bit about us. This is the main part of our campus. We have a 50-acre campus, and we're surrounded by 200 acres, also provided by Jim Self to protect us through the future. This is the newest of the building. This is the South Carolina Center for Treatment of Genetic Disorders, and this is meant to give visibility to the idea that the holy grail that we're after is finding cures for genetic disabilities. The next building that will be on the campus is the Clemson University Greenwood Genetics Center Graduate Education Center. We have graduate students from Clemson on our campus all of the time, doing their research and writing their theses from there, and soon we'll have a comparable facility called the Graduate Education Center. Our first and main focus is service to patients. So we see patients from every county in South Carolina every year. In many respects, we are much like Clemson. You serve our citizens from every county in the state. And of course, your reach is much greater than ours. We see patients from a dozen other states that come in to see us, but you have students, of course, from far and wide. I'll say just a word or two about education and a little bit about research, and then spend the rest of the time on our treatment programs. The only medical genetic training programs in South Carolina are in Greenwood, so we have both physicians and PhDs who are studying medical genetics, either clinical genetics or molecular studies or biochemical studies or cytogenetics. All of these are accredited programs for which the trainee can get certified if they pass their national boards. The most exciting thing that's coming up, I believe, is the Clemson University Greenwood Genetics Center Collaborative in Human Genetics. We already have PhD students in genetics with our faculty. The Graduate Education Center will be built hopefully beginning next year. And we have many research collaborations and a special emphasis on this new area of bioinformatics in collaboration with Clemson. We also do, as Clemson does, reach into our secondary areas to give information to secondary students and, of course, to undergraduates. There is a BS program with emphasis in genetics in Greenwood. We have 4 summer courses for high school science teachers to try to make sure that when the genetics part of their science course comes along, that they don't skip that and move on to something that they might be more comfortable with. And we have outreach to high schools throughout the state. Sort of the latest addition to this outreach program is this gene machine. And it's extraordinarily popular. We haven't figured out whether the kids just like the way it looks or they like to work in it or what, but it visits schools throughout the state, and science class can come and spend a day in the gene machine and learn many different genetic techniques, or at least learn how we're using those techniques in medical genetics. Research, I will mention just a couple things. Our focus in research has always been on disabilities, so we're interested in structural birth defects, particularly defects that affect the brain or the spine or the limbs or the rest of the covering of our bodies. We have focused for many years on intellectual disabilities. You'll recognize that this term is in the process of supplanting the term mental retardation, but that's basically what we're working on in one of our research areas. Have done a lot of work in gene identification and in sort of delineating the various conditions that cause intellectual disability. And just to give you sort of a feel for one particular research program, this is a cartoon of the X chromosome. The X chromosome is sort of unique and important to us. Boys only have one X chromosome. So if anything goes wrong with the genes on this chromosome, the boys take the brunt of it. You girls in the audience have a spare. So if something happens to one of the genes on your X chromosome, you've got another one to take care of you. So boys are uniquely vulnerable in this respect. So this gene, this chromosome, has about 1,000 genes on it. And lots of those genes have something to do with the way we think, the way we memorize, the way we learn. I've put up here about 80 different genes that are on this chromosome that influence the way we think. And I've highlighted for you the ones that our research team have contributed to. So this is basically the world's output of genes that influence our intellectual function that are on the X chromosome. And Dr. Schwartz's research group has played a large role in really about 1/3 of all of these genes. The last research thing that I'll mention relates to autism. It's hard to pick up a newspaper or any other publication and not see something about autism nowadays. So it's very much in the public mind. And although autism has been around forever, we've not made any substantial inroads into understanding what the cause or causes of autism might be. So we do have one fairly sizable research group that's working on autism, and I will just give you one glimpse of what they're doing. They too are focusing on this X chromosome. Boys are 4 times more likely to have autism than girls, and that is the reason that we have put our focus on the X chromosome, because of the special vulnerability of this single X in male. And what this research group thinks is going on in autism is not that the genes that are on that X chromosome are mutated or changed, that all of the genes, they believe, are perfectly okay. If you can sequence every gene on that chromosome and it's okay, the problem is that multiple genes do not work right. So the regulation of the of these genes are thrown asunder. So let me just graphically show you what they're finding. This is a dozen genes with funny names on the X chromosome. And these are normal college students or high school students. And this is the degree of the switch on each of these genes that is turned off. Okay, there's an off and on switch that genes operate by. So the normal situation for each of these genes, these represent the magnitude of the off switch. Okay? And here is autism. In 14 cases of autism, we can separate almost all of these autism cases from the normally functioning college and high school students just by looking at the magnitude of the switch change. Okay, so our belief is that the genes, multiple genes, you can see all across the board here, multiple genes are switched off chemically that should be functioning and contributing to sort of the balanced function of the nervous system in these children. So let's leave that and go to the topic of the evening. Now, when I was a little surprised when Bob said I could talk about anything I wanted to, because most people, when I get an invitation, they want me to talk about cloning or stem cells or designer genes or gene engineering or something of that sort. So I'm not going to speak about any of these things, but rather talk about the holy grail that we're after. That is, moving this field from a field that diagnoses conditions and says that this is a genetic condition as opposed to something that's caused by the environment, moving that entire field towards curative treatment. And there are many different ways, I've only listed a few, but there are many different ways that we can cure, if you will, or substantially prevent the ill effect of genetic disease. Diet's a good way. We certainly have drugs. There are vitamins and cofactors. We're now beginning to use certain proteins, clotting proteins for the hemophilia, enzymes for many diseases, organ transplants, surgery. And I said I wouldn't say anything about the words that were on that previous list, but I will say a word about gene therapy at the end. So I thought best to illustrate this, I would just tell you about 2 curative programs that are in South Carolina and are success stories that start with this. Many of you may recognize this little sheet if you've had children born or grandchildren born anytime in the past several decades in South Carolina. Before a baby can get out of the hospital, they give us 4 spots of blood. So a heel stick is done. 4 little spots of blood are collected, And those blood spots go to DHEC, Department of Health, and some 33 different genetic conditions are tested. 29 of those 33 genetic conditions lead to intellectual disability, prevent the child from learning if they're not identified immediately and gotten on treatment. So it's a very efficient system. Babies have their blood spots sent in within one to 2 days after they're born. DHEC turns around the lab test. If they have a positive test, the babies are in our hands within 3 or 4 days and are on therapy within a week. Now, what are these conditions? Well, you really don't want to know. They're awful names. Phenylketonuria, PKU, that one you may know about. Galactosemia, which is a sugar problem. A number of these others. Some of them, like PKU, have just gone to abbreviations because the names are so unmerciful. And in addition to these, there's some 23 other metabolic conditions. So 29 conditions that would prevent this baby from growing and learning left untreated. So here's the first. Here are 5 little tykes. All the babies that I'll show you are less than 7 years of age because those are sort of the magic years. The brain does what it's going to do in those preschool years. So if we protect the brain, protect its wiring during those years, then the baby can be perfectly normal, whether they're treated or not after that. So here are 20-some babies in South Carolina here, 5 of these little babies that are now on treatment. And here's where those babies come from. And here's the sugar problem, 10 babies that we have on treatment because they can't handle the sugar that's in milk. And there's where they live. Here's the awful MCAD, another 20-some children represented by these. And for some strange reason, they're all in the upstate. We don't have anybody from down along the coast. And then finally, here's 30 or so children with these other metabolic conditions here represented by 10 or 12 children. And you see where they are across the state. So these are conditions that permeate society. The babies, as they're born, look perfectly normal. There's no way to separate them from another baby. But using this blood test that is run by the state, we can find these babies and have them on treatment certainly within a week of life. And these babies grow up to be perfectly normal, functioning children. So there are lots of reasons to do this. The most important, of course, is having a healthy child that can run and play and learn and do all of these things. But I thought you might be interested in one other side of it. The therapies that these children have is really pretty expensive, about $40,000 a year to treat one of these babies. And if we treat them for 7 years, about $250,000. This is what the South Carolina Department of Disabilities tell us it costs them in dollars put out if we do not find these babies. So $3.8 million per child if they're not identified and treated. So we have a very sophisticated system that the health system has put in place in South Carolina to find all of these conditions that are curable, and a system not only to find them, to diagnose them, but to have them in a treatment program that monitors them, makes sure that they are being treated properly with the proper medications or the proper dietary change, and follow them for a period of 6 or 7 years to make sure that indeed they are developing normally. So a really extraordinary program, and one that many states have done the first part of it. That is, they do the testing, but once the baby's diagnosed, they're left on their own to find somebody that knows something about that condition to help them, which is a very cumbersome system. So I'm proud of South Carolina for doing that, and I'm proud of South Carolina for doing this. There are a group of birth defects called neural tube defects, the most common of which is open spine, spina bifida, but there are two others that involve the brain, like this. And the reason that it's important for South Carolina is that South Carolina has, for decades, been known to be the hot spot of the nation. If you're born in South Carolina, you have more than twice the risk of having open brain or open spine than if you're born anywhere else in the nation. That was the story until recently, until this guy came along, Dick Smithles. And Smithles was intrigued by these birth defects as they occurred in England. And he said, we can prevent those birth defects. I've done a simple little study by giving B vitamin called folic acid. And I noticed that if the parent is on this B vitamin, that the babies are born perfectly healthy, even in high-risk families where you might expect this to recur. So we have a great debt to Dick Smithles. His studies, he actually did his studies in the 70s and the early 80s. And folic acid is a simple water-soluble vitamin. And the scientific community, after hearing of his work, said, you know, that's just impossible. How could a simple little vitamin that's in collards and all these other green leafy vegetables, how could that prevent such a terrible birth defect as open spine or open brain? So it took, after Dick Smithles told us what the cure was, it took us a decade and a half to come to the conclusion with some additional studies that indeed he was correct. And so since the early 1990s, we have had in place a program in South Carolina because of our high prevalence to prevent these birth defects. And it's as simple as taking an over-the-counter multivitamin, but the key is it has to be taken before you become pregnant, or certainly the day you become pregnant, and it has to stay on board for a matter of a few weeks into the pregnancy. If you get into a pregnancy three weeks or so without the folic acid, then if the spine is open, there's no repair for it. So here's what happened. Back in 92 and years before, 1 out of every 500 babies born in South Carolina had open spine or open brain. Just a terrible birth defect, as you can imagine. And with the simple addition of folic acid, you can see what's happened over the years. Now, there's still some babies being born with one or the other of these birth defects, but we're down over 60% from where we started. So really a fairly remarkable record for such a major birth defect. We know the reason that some of these continue to occur because they are not being caused by folic acid insufficiency. They're caused by some other genetic defect that's causing their problem. But the major reason we haven't gotten down is we haven't gotten the message out to everyone who is becoming pregnant. Many people do not plan pregnancies. About half of pregnancies, we understand, are not planned. They're not planned. They may not be taking the proper precautions for preventive medicine. So it's our estimate that we could lower this number here down to probably half of that if throughout society everyone that could become pregnant were taking a simple multivitamin with folic acid. So I thought I would show you the same sort of numbers. It takes about $500,000 to do the extra surgical care and medical care of a baby that has open spine, for example. So with 60 babies being born healthy each year that previously would have had one of these defects, we are talking about a savings of $15 to $20 million for all of us as citizens each year because of a simple water-soluble vitamin. And as important as that may be, this is the more important message. These are the 60 babies, or that represents the 60 babies each year that are born with healthy brain and spine who previously would have had one of these birth defects. So back to our hot topics. I told you I wasn't going to talk about these, but I will mention gene therapy because I get so many questions about it, particularly about will we be engineering genetic faults in the future. And one simple concept related to gene therapy is if there's a gene defect that affects some tissue or organ of the body, could you just inject the normal gene, forget about the bad gene being there, but could you just inject the normal gene and it would get into the tissue or organ and take care of the problem? And most people have said, well, that's sort of a crazy idea, but in fact, it is already happening, and I'll just give you one example of it. And this relates to the eye. Now, if you're scared of being injected into your eye, as I would be, this may not be a pleasant thought to you, but there's a large group of disorders called retinal degenerations because of a number of different genetic problems that collectively are called retinitis pigmentosa. There's pigment deposits in the retina, in the visual apparatus, and these folks lose vision, eventually become blind because of this. And so we know the genes that cause retinitis pigmentosa, and the question is, since you've got a localized problem, everything else in the body's okay, could you inject the normal gene into the eye of a person that has retinitis pigmentosa and take care of that problem? And that has now been done, direct injection behind the retina in persons who have this type of problem. And I'll just show you one change, but the bottom line is that there is, after gene therapy of this nature, there is sustained improvement longitudinally beginning at about 2 weeks after the injection. So this picture will this is the light sensitivity in about 15 patients here. And 2 weeks after that, here's what their light perception is. And this dramatic change in ability to receive light is accompanied by visual acuity and other measures of visual function. So what I would have thought would be a sort of a crazy idea will certainly have applications in the gene world, particularly if there's a targeted problem. You know, if the genetic problem is localized to the heart or localized to the eye or localized to a place that you can get to and is caused by a gene defect, then you may be able to correct some of those, certainly not all of them, by direct injection of the genes. And this is, I guess, the first really good example of gene therapy, but it is an area of genetic therapy that I think you will see grow over the years ahead. I would hasten to say that I don't think this is going to be the major approach to genetic disease. I don't think we're going to be correcting individual patients one by one. I think rather we're going to have the folic acids that allow us to get around the gene defect or compensate in some way so that large numbers of patients with a given condition can be treated without individual engineering for a particular problem in a particular patient. So all of this that's going on in South Carolina, we'd like to claim it all for the Greenwood Genetics Center, but of course that's not true. There are genetic workers all over this state. The only ones that I had pictures of are the folks down at USC. These are a group of genetic counselors and two doctorate level geneticists. At the Medical University in Charleston, there likewise are several groups of geneticists that are working on various different programs. And any type of population-wide program of this nature really requires lots of partners. And we are happy to be partnered with all of these from the education standpoint. Clemson, absolutely, from the standpoint of services to patients, the South Carolina Department of Disabilities. But all of these partners contribute to the emergence of this era that we are moving into of curative therapy for genetic disorders. Thank you very much. Yes, Bruce.
The intriguing story that you told, you tell a number, but one in particular about the sponsored blood and the identification at birth, what might be dealt with. I'm wondering about the mechanism, that is, what happens once a child has been identified, let's just call the child defective for the sake of the conversation, but a defect has been found. Does the parent get a telephone call? Is the parent put in touch with an organization so that immediately something begins to happen? But how does the mechanism really work?
Yes, the question, starting with that blood spot that all of our babies have, what happens after that? So the blood spot is taken, it goes to the Department of Health in Columbia, they test for all of these genetic conditions, and if they find a positive, and they'll find lots more positives that, a lot of false positives, they don't want to miss anybody, so they'll find 10 positives for every child that really has a problem. All right, so their doctor is called immediately. And they are alerted to the fact that first the baby needs to be seen and the diagnosis needs to be confirmed. So of the 10 babies that come in with a positive test that are sent to us, 9 of them, we will be able to tell the parent, we have studied your baby's situation and the baby's perfectly okay, but the one case that is confirmed to have PKU or some other problem is immediately started on therapy. And the team that takes care of these babies is a team from the Greenwood Genetics Center, but we're all over the state. We have 6 clinics throughout the state so that patients can go wherever is closest to them. They may need to come to Greenwood one time for concentrated attention, but after that, they can go to Charleston or Florence or wherever. It doesn't end there, however. Take the baby with that first condition, PKU. That baby we see twice a week, has a blood test twice a week to make sure that the chemical imbalance that the baby has now been moved into the normal range and stays there. Okay? So over the first year, a baby with one of these conditions might be seen 100 times by our treatment team. Year 2, when the parents are now becoming the experts in how to handle this, we might see the child 40 or 50 times. By the time the child is 7 years of age, not only the parents, but the child is the expert in how to handle their problem, and we may see them once or twice a year to check their blood level, make sure they're okay. But it's a very tight system up front with lots of controls, and the reason the blood is tested again is because these babies look okay. They're just at risk of losing 10 IQ points a month if they're not treated. Yes?
Do the parents have any option of refusing or not following through on the program? Does that happen?
Yes. The question is, do the parents have any option to? This test is mandated by law, but a parent can refuse to have the test done to begin with on the baby for religious reasons. That's the only exception in the state law. Secondly, they can refuse treatment. Over all of the years that we have been taking care of these babies, I only know of one circumstance where the parents did not want treatment. They said, our baby was born with a genetic problem. It's part of our diversity. We want to live with that. We don't want a cure.
So there's no violation of child abuse?
Well, it all depends on the circumstance. There was in that case, and the child eventually came into treatment. But the parent certainly has to participate in the treatment. And the treatment is very rigorous. Again, for this condition, PKU, it's an extraordinary diet. You may be interested in the diet itself. Basically, babies live on milk, and milk for them is poison. And the component of milk that's poison is one amino acid, phenylalanine. So to treat these babies, we digest the milk, pull out the phenylalanine, put everything else back in, and give the baby the formula. Well, milk without phenylalanine is the most awful tasting stuff you can imagine. If I ask you to live for a week on this, you would refuse. But babies have no choice. I guess they do not recognize how awful it is or whatever. They're just hungry and want to eat, and they eat, and they actually learn to love it. And which brings up one little side event, and I'll get off of PKU. The phenylalanine levels in boys, we treat up to age 6 or 7, and then they can go off of the diet. They eat hamburgers or drink milkshakes or do anything they want, and the brain is mature at 7 years. And so they can eat whatever they want and have no problems. Girls can do the same, but we keep girls on the diet because should they become pregnant and need to go back on the diet during the pregnancy, it's just impossible for them to do so because of the taste and the inability to tolerate. So girls we ask to stay on throughout their childbearing years. Once they're through with their children, they can join the boys. Other questions? Yes?
Why are babies in the South Carolina more susceptible to birth defects?
Question is, why in South Carolina are we more susceptible to certain birth defects? The specific birth defect that we have had more trouble with are the defects of spine and brain. And we think we know the reason, and I'll try to give it to you in short terms. It appears that there are certain high-risk areas in the world. Ireland and Wales has a very high risk of these same birth defects, and that population has an inability to use folic acid properly, efficiently. And in South Carolina, we've tested families in South Carolina that have had babies with this type of birth defect and found that they also have a genetic inability to efficiently use folic acid. So while they may be getting the same amount of folic acid as their neighbor, they have a resistance or an intolerance that doesn't provide their body, and certainly doesn't provide the growing baby, adequate folic acid to form properly. So it looks like a chemical inborn genetic problem that causes folic acid not to be used as efficiently. Yes?
Talk a little bit more about autism. With the blood tests, are we able to detect that there could be a possibility of autism from that blood test?
The question is two-pronged. It's about autism, which is a hot topic nowadays, and whether or not the blood test can detect autism. Right now, the blood test cannot detect autism because we don't know exactly what to look for. If the research from Dr. Jones's research group is correct, that we can separate children who will have autism from those who will not by this methylation or this switch test, then it will be perfectly possible to diagnose at the time of birth or at 2 weeks or at whatever age. Yeah, that's specifically what this research team is working towards, and what their information at this time would look very promising to us, that within a matter of years, perhaps 5 years, we should have a specific blood test for autism, as opposed to this long, difficult period of trying to determine whether a child has autism or not.
There's so many levels of autism.
Yes, the point is that there are lots of different types or varieties of autism.
Some seem so severe, and then others are not so severe.
Exactly. And in the research participants that Dr. Jones has, she has tried to have all varieties. She's tried to characterize them as to exactly what they have, but has included the entire autism spectrum, and what she's finding appears that it may apply to all of the spectrum of autism.
There has been so many misconceptions about autism.
Yes.
And trying to blame shots that babies got and different things that's totally outside of the genetic area of a child.
That's very true. I would hasten to say that there may be still something in our environment that is adding to autism, because there has been an apparent increase in the prevalence. Part of that's we're recognizing it more and we're calling it what it is now, but there still may be a real increase in autism. And if there is, then we're going to have to look at the environment to see if there's some insult coming from the environment that is contributing to that.
We have an autistic granddaughter, and we're very interested in how many more children have autism now.
Yes.
That it just seems to be climbing, and you say, why?
Yes. Yes.
On your map where you place the babies in their counties, their birth defect, I noted that there's a strip there between the upper Piedmont and the coast that had no defects in it. Now, is there a reason for that?
Yeah. The question relates to that map that I showed you where these particular babies live, and there are a couple blank spots that cover several counties. The folks in Aiken, and there are no babies in that area, they've said that the Savannah River plant is protective. Is that right, Jim? No. These are very small numbers that we're dealing with, and these are very young babies. We have patients in those counties with these disorders, but I was just showing you these babies that are between 1 and 7 years of age that are on active treatment. Yeah, but it is sort of odd to see that map with holes in it, isn't it? Yes.
Also, I'd like to know now if a baby is born in South Carolina with Down syndrome,
Yes.
what facilities are there for parents to help with the training and rearing of that child?
Okay. The question relates to assistance for parents who have a baby born with a genetic condition called Down syndrome. We have one entire state agency that's responsible for that, the South Carolina Department of Disabilities and Special Needs. And they have programs that reach down to 1 and 2 and 3 early intervention programs that are run by really a collaboration of Department of Health and the Department of Disabilities. But if there's ever any question about services for a child who has one of these disabilities, that would be the place to start with Department of Disabilities.
You are not touching any of that education.
We are not involved in the early intervention, and so we evaluate these children to document what the genetic disorder is, but the early intervention and supportive care is provided by a state agency.
I understand that the genetics community has not been immune from the economic problems the state's faced in the last couple of years, and that a lot of genetics programs, including perhaps even GZC, have had to face cutbacks in terms of the types of programs and services they offer. In light of the fact that you just said that GZC and other genetics groups do something different than, say, what the Department of Disabilities does, how do you think that's going to impact treatment, or those cutbacks will impact treatment of our citizens over the next few years as we try and dig ourselves out
Out of this hole we're in. Yeah, I think all of you heard that the concern is whether our economy and our state economic situation will impede the access to services or even the availability of genetic services. And I know that has happened around the nation, that many genetic programs have seen cutbacks. And we at the Greenwood Genetics Center have not been immune to that situation, but we have not seen the state reduce any services for these conditions. This treatment, these two programs, for example, have been completely funded, are completely funded, so that parents have access to them regardless of their individual family means. So I think there's a farsightedness in our government circles that have protected some of these services, certainly more so than the educational system, for example, as it appears. Yes?
Are you doing any studies on adult onset conditions?
We are not doing any, our research program is not dealing with adult onset conditions, but our service programs do evaluate people who have genetic disorders that only make their appearance in adult life. Yes, so our clinics around the state see patients of all different ages. Yes? Yes. One of the slides had bioinformatics. It's not a new science, but a new science to us that I just never imagined when I got into genetics that we would have to have sophisticated scientists who were biostatistics folks and persons who could analyze large bodies of data. And we now on our campus have one entire building of people who do nothing but crunch numbers. For example, if we're doing a gene sequence, say we do 90 genes, we will get billions of codes that come out of that, and someone has to analyze that. So this whole, in our field, the bioinformatics area, are these people who take large bodies of data, break it down, tell us what it means, if it's important or if it's something that's been seen elsewhere that's perfectly okay. So they're sophisticated biostatisticians and number crunchers and data miners, I guess. Yes?
Once you extract information you need from the infant's sample collected, do you store their
Yeah. The question is, what happens to these blood spots and what happens to the DNA that you get from it? So the blood spots are held by the Department of Health for a period of 2 years. A person whose baby has been tested can request that that be sent back to them, or they can request that it be destroyed, but they generally hold them for 2 years in case there's something that is missed or something else that needs to be tested for. When we get the DNA, when we see the baby, we will retest the DNA. We ask the parents to make a choice to, once the testing is done, to destroy the sample or to keep the sample with their name on it in case it might be needed in the future for diagnosis or research. They can select whatever. Or they can decide to take their name off of it and leave it in our hands for research purposes. So the parents, once we get a DNA sample or any type of sample, the parent has the prerogative to decide, it's their material, what they want to have done with it. Sorry, yes? Question is, are other states doing the same type of blood spot testing? Every state now does some type of newborn screening. Some states might test for 3 conditions, some might test for 5 conditions. The last time I checked, there were now 28 states that had gone to this full panel of treatable diseases. And the goal is to get every state in the union to detect everything that we have a cure for.
So South Carolina then, was it one of the first to do this? Did the treatment follow that you had?
It was one of the first to do this, not the first to develop the test, but the first to adopt the test and then to say we've got to have the cures, we've got to get the benefit of doing the testing, which some states have failed to do. It's hard to understand. Thank you all. It's been great being with you.